What's up, guys? Mr. Terry here, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher X video. All right, today we're back with a friend of the channel, Chad History, and a new video that he has that is doing really well. It's called Something Bad About Every U.S. State's History Explained. All right, this should be great because if you are an American, it looks like we've got dirt on your home. You know, not from the United States, go ahead and join us in laughing at us or despising us, maybe? Whatever. All right, this should be fun to learn about and comment on. As always, original video is down below. Please support Chad History. He's been a great friend of the channel, came on History Showdown. Make sure you give them that support. And if you like what's going on here, give it a thumbs up. All right, let's get started. By the way, an update on ZitWatch. Zit has now become a scab. Further details coming up.
Something bad about every U.S. state.
In no particular order.
Hawaii is our most recent state added to the Big 50 in 1959. The U.S. government had their eyeballs all over the little group of islands as a strategic military outpost in the 1800s. Not to mention the sugarcane plantations.
And pineapple. Basically just agriculture. The U.S. basically overthrew their monarchy because they're like, yo, sugar, pineapple. Thanks.
Freedom forbid any smelly European or Asian countries get their grubby paws on it. So with that in mind, as well as wanting to circumvent any potential sugar tariffs, a couple of U.S. businessmen with a couple of U.S. Marines pointed a couple of their U.S. guns at Hawaiian King Kalakaua in 1887, forcing him to sign over power to the United States. But after the king kamei'd his last hame, his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, tried to regain power, but the U.S. was all, ha! So
last queen of Hawaii.
Later, and the Republic of Hawaii was established in 1894, led by one Sanford Dole, whose cousin would go on to form the Hawaiian Pineapple Company, which would later become the Dole Food Company.
You know what's amazing is the idea of having land for agricultural production for private companies has fueled American imperialism in this era. Now, this is, again, like the age of sort of the new age of imperialism, like late 1800s, early 1900s. Simultaneously, by the way, Europeans are completely pillaging Africa. United States, not really get involved with that. Yeah, there's the Liberia story, whatever. But Monroe Doctrine basically said the Americas, North, South America, everything else over there, that's America's backyard. European nations supposed to stay there. But yeah, another one as an example would be bananas, like in Guatemala, for example. That is a story for another time, too.
If you've never had it, Dole Whip is freaking amazing. Highly recommend it. Ground zero for the 1918 influenza pandemic, the deadliest pandemic of the modern world, is widely believed to have been Camp Funston in Manhattan, Kansas. The camp itself was an army base training infantry in the closing months of World War I. Well, with failure to quarantine sick troops, the flu was definitely not just in Kansas anymore. Sickly soldiers were sent overseas where they oversneezed in Europe, spreading the flu worldwide. By the end of the pandemic, around 1921, roughly 500 million people around the globe had been infected, with death toll estimates ranging from 50 to 100 million poor souls.
Yeah, worst pandemic of the... I mean, basically since the plague. But yeah, you know, this has often been called the Spanish flu, if you've heard of that. That term is starting to kind of go away because it's not accurate, like, at all. I think the big reason was, like, the Spanish king actually got it. But yeah, the earliest tracing, get back to it, is actually from the United States. So those troops were leaving, going to World War I. So the U.S. troops are getting in there about late 1917, really 1918, coming in there. And that's when you saw it spread. And it especially spread through war, because war is one of the worst places to spread disease. And then it spread through Europe and around the world. It was nuts. There's actually some really interesting stuff you can look at if you want to do a compare and contrast the societal responses to the Spanish flu. 1918 flu really is a better explanation. And say like COVID, because obviously you're going to bring up, you know, similarities with that. In fact, one of the assignments that I've done in my AP World History classes is about that, and about reactions to the into the 1918 flu. And it always makes for an interesting discussion, because you had, like, for example, try to you know, like, have masks and like enforce masks in places, and then people, you know, often they rejected that. Then there was quarantining. It's really interesting. Anyway,
July 16th, 1940.
by the way, the only other thing, Kansas, I was wondering if they would do like bleeding Kansas with the violence there over slavery, but okay. By the way, let me know in chat if there are some other stories you think would also be really good. I guess dark sides or bad, or I don't know, whatever you want to do about maybe your state. Let us know down below.
From 50 to 100 million poor souls.
That's nuts.
July 16th, 1945 saw the detonation of the world's first nuclear weapon at the Trinity Nuclear Testing Site in the Jornada del Muerto Desert in New Mexico. The successful detonation was the catalyst for the construction of the 2 atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan towards the end of World War II. It's just a shame that thousands of New Mexico locals were never warned about the testing because they caught some heavy radiation dosages.
Sure. You know, they didn't know exactly what the radiation fallout and all that stuff would be, because you also do have things like wind. There's a story about a girls' camp that was, shoot, I forget how many miles away, like 40 miles or something like that. And it was like a girls' dance camp, from what I understand. And it was said, because this is in July, right, that the girls went outside and they thought it was snowing. These little droplets of what looked like snow was coming down, and they're like doing the thing with their tongue, catching it. It was ash. It was ash from the atomic bomb blast. And from what I'd heard, almost all of those girls eventually over the years got cancer and I think died. Crazy.
Between the years of 1948 and 1975, the Aberdeen Proving Ground facility in Aberdeen, Maryland, hosted a wealth of unethical human experiments on U.S. Army soldiers. About 7,000 soldiers were experimented on, all without informed consent, meaning that they had no idea what they were getting into.
Yeah, what is this? It's just medical experiments. You know, sometimes soldiers would sign away like rights to this kind of stuff, but then they wouldn't get benefits or anything. It was really sad. I wonder what that is. What are those blisters? Is it from gas? If it had color, you could tell more. If it was like mustard color.
The men were exposed to over 250 different chemical weapons, including mustard gas, deadly nerve agents, and psychoactive substances for the sake of researching effects, preventative measures, and medical treatments. Despite the lethality of some of these substances, dosages were low enough where no deaths were reported. These are getting dark really quick.
That we know of, right? That we know of, right? Pretty crazy. You can get down some deep rabbit holes, by the way, when you look at like the CIA and State Department, and especially like Cold War era, when they were getting into all those kind of things. You can get down there. If you're a conspiracist, you probably already know. And if you're not a conspiracist, you might be after you go down that rabbit hole of government experimentation. Maine, you don't hear about Maine much. What are the lobster fishermen doing?
The Aroostook War of 1838 was a bloodless armed standoff between American and British Canadian lumberjacks. While they slept all night and worked all day, there was a disagreement about where the U.S.-Canadian border actually was.
Right.
So both sides, eager to chop into the Aroostook River Valley's supple, sappy trees, got into a bit of a kerfuffle.
You cannot go fight the Canadians for syrup, dude. That's like where they draw the line. I was going to say, like, you know, the Canadians are so nice, but if you were with me a few days ago, we covered that simple history video about how insanely brutal Canada has been in wars. It's crazy. So I can't use that anymore. I'm not going to use that stereotype.
Troops were deployed, but no shots were fired and no lives were lost. Instead, everyone skipped and jumped home to cut down trees on their respective sides. The 1974 super outbreak was one of the most intense tornado outbreaks in recorded history, with 147 separate tornadoes formed in a 25-hour period across 13 states, with Indiana being hit the hardest.
I have an early memory. I've lived all over the country, by the way, and maybe I can highlight any stories I'm aware of from states I've been in. But one of my earliest memories, I used to live in Minnesota when I was really little, was tornado. There was a huge tornado, and I was probably in like first grade. And houses often had crawl spaces built kind of into the foundation, so it'd be like cement. And I remember going down there, and it was very loud and scary. And we went outside after it was gone, and the trees were ripped apart. Like in our own front yard, a huge tree was down. And I remember that being frightening.
47 fatalities, 1,000 injuries, and hundreds of millions of dollars in damages were reported. That blows. Just slightly west of Virginia is West Virginia, home to the worst mining disaster in the history of the United States. So far.
Big mining
On December 6, 1907, the Fairmont Coal Company's number 6 and number 8 mine shafts in the town of Monongah went kablooey. Two separate methane explosions instantly killed hundreds of workers in the mines and trapped any of those fortunate enough to survive.
Would that be natural methane coming in? Otherwise, why would methane be in there? Is that just something you can find pockets of underground? Any miners in here? Gold!
But their luck quickly ran out. The combined blast collapsed most of the existing cave structure and the ventilation shaft, blocking off fresh air and building up toxic gases which suffocated the trapped miners. The lack of any safety standards or respiratory safety equipment made rescue attempts hopeless.
Dude, getting stuck in a mine has got to be one of my biggest fears of something dark. I mean, everyone's claustrophobic to some point, but getting caught in there and you can't see and can't eat and can't breathe. It's just slow death like that. I can't think of a lot of other ways that I would want to die.
Only 5 men managed to be saved, with 362 lives lost. The tragedy sparked public outcry for stricter safety standards, and in 1910, the U.S. government established the Bureau of Mines with the goal of reducing mining accidents.
There's just no safety.
It had been a few decades before any safety standards would be enforced.
Let's enter some context here. We're saying 1907 or whatever, first decade there. Remember that this was that era in United States history that's still kind of going with the Second Industrial Revolution, where there was still a debate about what role the government should play in the safety of workplaces. You know, it was such an era where with the limited power of government, the idea was you stay out of government intervention. It's laissez-faire economics. And up to that point, really, these businesses were solely responsible for the health conditions. And when that happened, because there was no external pressure for that, enforcing of safety regulations, the bare minimum at best would usually be in these type of things because it eats into profit margins. And it's in this era where you're getting what's called the progressive movement, where you're starting to get these different type of presidents, give like Teddy Roosevelt, for example, that were trying to push for more of these type of organizations. He's probably the most famous one of the progressive era, but you can see those guys around the turn of the century. William Jennings Bryan also being one of them.
Bet you don't yearn for the mines
anymore,
anymore,
failed his presidential bids.
In 1879, members of the Osage Native tribe struck oil on their reservation. The U.S. government did what it does and quickly swooped in to establish oil production and paid out royalties to the members of the Osage tribe, catapulting them to astronomical levels of wealth.
Oh, they did get it.
And that's when the mysterious death started. You see, Congress, not believing that the natives were capable of managing their wealth by themselves, appointed American businessmen and lawyers to look after their finances as legal guardians.
I've heard of this story.
Well, throughout the 1920s, some of these guardians began the systematic murder of 60 Osage natives in order to inherit their wealth.
So there was, if I remember right, these lawyers or whatever were really trying to use some deep kind of between the lines laws and find loopholes and different type of clauses or whatever where they could slowly chip away at this ownership. Totally corrupt.
Murder of 60 Osage natives in order to inherit their wealth. Formal investigations were launched, becoming one of the first major investigations conducted by the FBI.
1929.
If you want to read more about this, I highly recommend the book Killers of the Flower Moon. There was also a film adaptation done recently, but
that sounds familiar.
Apparently
93 Rotten Tomatoes, though. It's just kind of a mix. Those 1-star reviews, is it just like, don't talk about the bad parts of American history.
Killers of the Flower Moon.
I've heard of this. Is this a good film
adaptation done recently, but it apparently wasn't as good. Louisiana. In the early 1900s, there was a plethora of invasive water hyacinths just gunking up the local rivers.
Gross.
Not to mention
gross state
meat
geographically.
Shortage. So in order to feed two birds with one stone, the American Hippo Bill was proposed to Congress. The bill would import African hippos to munch on the plants, only for said hippos to be subsequently munched on by Americans. Other animals were on the list.
That is a thing, right? Aren't there like hippo steaks or something like that? Dude, if we had hippos, what would you guys rather have though? Hippos or alligators? Like we got gators all over the place. Or should we just have both? Do they attack each other, by the way? Would they?
including Manchurian pigs, African buffalo, Tibetan yaks, rhinos, and of course,
rhinos are cool.
Dicks. Sadly, the bill never passed, thwarting American plans to deep throat delicious and nutritious
dumber-looking deer.
A series of massive earthquakes.
Okay, yeah. I mean, the hippo makes sense because they swim, but would they like that kind of climate? All right, Missouri. What could be going down here? Mormon extermination order?
Completely rocked southeast Missouri in 1811. One 8.0 magnitude earthquake was so severe that it caused sections of the Mississippi River to flow
you don't
backwards,
hear about earthquakes.
And several parts of the surrounding landscape to go all bleh.
In the
Some
Midwest.
People died, probably. On April 12th,
I was wondering about the Mormon extermination order, where their Governor Boggs, basically put out an order to kick out the Mormons out of Missouri, which they ended up doing, and then leaving to go up to Illinois and trekking up there, which was actually really deadly. There's a lot of little skirmishes there. The kind of Missouri Mormon War. You can look into it. It's kind of interesting. But all right, South Carolina, something bad. What? Seceding from the Union? Fort Sumter, or the hub of America's slave trade?
1861, those gosh dang Confederates bombarded Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina for 34 hours straight and 0 hours gay, marking the start of the United States Civil War, which would go on to claim the lives of nearly 700,000 people. The worst...
By the way, is it Charleston? I forget which... Is it Charleston for South Carolina? Or if it's another city, let me know, where there is like a dialect of... English or whatever that's spoken by the African-American community there. Like, I don't know if it's in a few neighborhoods or how widespread it is, but it is like unchanged apparently since slave times. Okay. Like centuries, couple centuries of this. And it's changed so little that it's like the closest to what it would have sounded like basically for like slaves to speak. And it's like kept up. And I think maybe, I don't know if there's maybe something like a pride element to it where it's like trying to keep up that like cultural heritage. I've heard it before. I remember watching a video and it sounds so interesting because it does almost have like these like African, almost like Caribbean elements. And if you think about that too, it's the same thing with like the Caribbean where, you know, the Caribbean, which is where the highest percentage of slaves went. If you heard like that dialect, it's because it's infused with African, because so much African influence with that. All right, Michigan. Oh, what's going down here? I don't know. Detroit really fell apart. It's on the way back up, right?
The massacre in U.S. history involving a school dates all the way back to 1927 in the small town of Bath, Michigan. Local disgruntled douche Andrew Kehoe used dynamite to destroy the Bath Consolidated School, an expensive upgrade to the local school district. The construction and maintenance of the school caused local property taxes to shoot up to account for operating costs.
Yeah.
Kehoe, who was already on edge from his failing farming and political careers,
one of these
as
guys.
well as a terminally ill wife, had hit a breaking point with the steeper tax burden.
F the schools.
Over the course of several months, Kehoe had managed to purchase multiple crates of dynamite, something typically used in farming at the time for stump and boulder removal, and hid them throughout the school. On the morning of May 18th, 1927, the dynamite was detonated, killing 38 in the process and injuring dozens more.
What? It was a terrorist attack. It's a domestic terrorist attack. But like killing the people in them, I could be like, I can't imagine this, but like they're trying to make a sign about the taxes, so you're gonna blow it up, but you do it in like the middle of the night, I guess, which is still ridiculously stupid. But while the kids are there, while the people are there, by the way, obviously this was backfire, not just because even if he got away with it, and I don't know if he does here, they have to rebuild it, which is going to cost more taxpayer money. Dude, I've never heard of this one. The terrorist attack.
Dynamite was detonated, killing 38 in the process and injuring dozens more. While the chaos ensued, Kehoe had murdered his wife, destroyed his own farm, and drove to the school with his truck packed with more dynamite. He parked his car in front of the school and detonated the truck, taking himself and a few bystanders out with him.
Oh my!
Luckily though, a second hoard of dynamite within the school failed to detonate, preventing further loss of life.
Dude.
This single tragedy had claimed a quarter of the town's children.
Dude, nothing. Divorced dads, man. You gotta be You gotta be careful, man.
California,
all right, what are you gonna do with Cali? Oh my gosh, something bad. I don't know.
Single tragedy had claimed a quarter.
That's so sad. I've never heard of that. Bath schools.
California, the United States' sweaty ass crack, boasts the largest economy in the country, which is perfect because that's
fourth in the world, right? Fourth largest. If it was a country, be like the fourth in the world. Behind what? U.S., Japan, China. Is that right?
It's sweaty ass crack boasts the largest economy in the country, which is perfect because that's what they need to constantly fund relief efforts for the thousands of wildfires each year, burning millions of acres.
Yep.
In 2020 alone, California saw over 9,600 wildfires with almost 4.4 million acres reduced to char. Do better, get wetter. Extremely
I mean, just get the water. There's a lot of importation of water, of course, that has to happen there. And if we do have drier climate, if that continues to occur more, these places are drier. It's going to happen even more. A place like California, and then abroad, a place like Australia, if global climates change and just that drier climate's going to lend itself to more fires. I don't know if you know, but when it comes to forest fires, a lot of them come from lightning strikes, which can cause fire. And then there's a lot of kindling, right? Then of course there's the idiots that accidentally start fires. All right, Mississippi. Let's see, they get criticized for having like the worst education in the country.
Heavy and frequent rainfall in 1926 through 1927 culminated in the Great Mississippi River Flood of 1927. The big old river traveled across the land, flooding far and wide through several states, including Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and of course, Mississippi.
By the way, shout out to Texas, anyone affected by the awful floods there. I hope you're safe. I hope you're doing well. And Godspeed on the rebuild.
Around 500 souls were washed away and several hundred thousands of people were displaced from their homes, resulting in upwards of $10 billion in damages. The U.S. Dakota...
So that kind of stuff would destroy a farm. All right, Minnesota. All right, one of the states I've lived in. What do they got?
Homes, resulting in upwards of $10 billion in damages.
The tornado.
The U.S. Dakota War of 1862 in Minnesota resulted in the largest public execution in United States history. The people of the Dakota Native American tribe were pretty darn pissed as incoming settlers sought to manifest their destiny across the Midwest.
Manifest destiny, if you didn't know, that was basically almost like a foreign policy of the United States. That the United States had a sort of God-given right to colonize everything west to the Pacific Ocean and spread civilization along the way. Ironic, I guess you're getting these public executions, and then I guess in respect of said fallen Dakota people, you get named the two like worst states after you.
After constant displacement and being on the brink of starvation due to poor farming and hunting conditions, the Dakota had just about enough. A small group of Dakota men had attacked and killed 5 settlers, including a man, his wife, and their teenage daughter. This escalated into a small uprising, which was stomped out by the U.S. Volunteer Army over the course of about a month and a half. Over 350 U.S. civilians were massacred, with 150 Dakota natives killed in the clash. After all was said and done, 400 Dakota men faced trial, with 303 sentenced to death, though President Lincoln did reduce this down to just 38 men sentenced for execution.
Some pardons?
These men received their short drop and a sudden stop in front of a public crowd on December 26, 1862.
I mean, the public stuff is supposed to be a way of deterring others that might do that, but we'll see what kind of purpose that would serve. And with Dakota there, that's par for the course for what happened through this whole manifest destiny process. All right, Washington. Seattle's had some rough times, especially back in the early years.
Since 2007, over 20 detached and decayed human feet have been washed ashore along the coast of the Salish Sea in northeastern Washington. The feet have been found in various shoes, supposedly protected from additional predation from scavengers. Several of the feet have been identified as remains of missing people or those suspected of ending their own life within the area. Pretty sad, but hey, free shoes. And perhaps
I got way more questions. Why are their feet separated from their bodies? Was it a cult? Oh man, Ohio. All right, Chris, vlogging through history. If you're watching this, let me know what you think.
Life within the area.
What's going on with your state?
Pretty sad, but hey, free shoes.
Yeah.
In perhaps the worst lapse of judgment in the history of mankind, the city of Cleveland, Ohio organized Balloon Fest in 1986.
Oh my
The goal of the event was to break a world record of most balloons released simultaneously, but I guess no one realized that balloons don't rise in perpetuity. Shortly after the release of—
Well, okay, how about they're also made of horrible rubber that is going to litter and be horrible for the environment? Like, there's so many better Guinness World Records we could break here. What are we doing?
I guess no one realized that balloons don't rise in perpetuity. Shortly after the release of over 1.5 million inflatables, a storm system promptly blew the elastic spheres back to Earth, blanketing the city and polluting Lake Erie. Airplanes were grounded, fishermen went missing, waterways became clogged, and many lawsuits were issued. All in all, the cleanup cost the city of Cleveland over $5 million. The people of Oregon really hate it when you pronounce it as Oregon. So I've experienced. But
Oregon. Wait, what did he say? Oregon?
Of Oregon really hate it when you pronounce it as Oregon.
Yeah, so nobody says that.
But anyway, a few months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, a single Japanese pilot flew a secret mission to bomb the forests of Oregon in an attempt to divert war supplies. Incendiary bombs were dropped in the forest of Brookings, but in terms of damage, they didn't do jack shit. Thanks. After the war, the Japanese pilot, Nobuo Fujita, was invited back to Brookings as a guest of honor in order to make amends, which he hesitantly accepted. As a formal apology for his actions, Fujita presented the city his family heirloom katana, one passed down across 400 years, which is still on display in the Chetco Public Library.
You imagine this, like, little bombing or whatever of, like, it had no effect, and they go do some formal apology, and now you get this badass family katana.
Timothy Treadwell was a huge fan of wild grizzly bears. Keyword being was. He spent about 13 summers living amongst them in Alaska, returning one final time towards the end of autumn.
You're not a
bear,
dude.
The Bears then became a huge fan of Timothy. One giant grizzly had attacked Timothy and his girlfriend, mauling and eating the couple. The bear was later shot and killed, with an autopsy confirming human remains in its stomach. Fellas, don't befriend giant wild animals.
Okay, so one of the places I like to go to is Yellowstone National Park. And Yellowstone is a national park that is very popular amongst people that don't go outdoors and don't understand nature. They come from big cities and they don't understand animals. And you'll get these traffic jams in Yellowstone where people will be stopping and they'll be like wolves or a moose or, again, bears. Like, they'll get out of their car and go up close to them and be like taking selfies and stuff. Just absolutely no respect for nature. Then every once in a while you'll hear about a bear or like a buffalo or something goring someone to death. I'm like, you guys are idiots. Respect nature.
Care how cute their ears are. They're wild animals.
Yeah.
They will murder you.
North
Carolina
cool,
almost became No Carolina in 1961 after a B-52 bomber carrying a payload of 2 nuclear bombs headed towards the Canadian Arctic experienced a catastrophic failure and broke up midair shortly after takeoff. The destroyed aircraft unintentionally dropped the bombs back down to Earth, with one falling from the plane as if properly deployed,
inert, right?
Initiating a sequence of safety switches for detonation. However, one final safety switch failed to actuate, saving North Carolina and a few surrounding states from becoming nothing more than a big black smudge on the globe.
All right, you want something to scare yourself? They're unaccounted for nukes somewhere in the world. Good night.
The other bomb slammed into the Earth, but very luckily remained intact and relatively undamaged. Both bombs were rated as 3.8 megaton bombs, about 250 times more powerful than those dropped on Japan at the end of World War II.
Right, those were kilotons then.
The US almost accidentally nuked itself into oblivion. During the events of World War II, tens of thousands of Japanese Americans were relocated to several internment camps across the country out of fear of domestic attacks. One such camp was the Hart Mountain Camp in Park County, Wyoming, which housed 14,000 Japanese Americans during its 3 years of operation between 1942 and 1945.
Where I live right now, which is Utah, there is not too far from me a place called Topaz that has was one of those camps. They've taken out the building there, but there's I think there's like a little monument or I don't know if there's a museum there or something. I haven't gone out there, but I thought that might be cool for like an original kind of content video if I was to go over there, kind of document that. What do you guys think? Would you be interested in that? All right, what do we got at this camp?
The camp boasted many activities, a poorly supplied school for children, a hospital, and many sports and social clubs. But, they were still forced to be there and heavily monitored. Way back before the U.S. was even established, the English colony of Jamestown, Virginia was formed in 1607.
First permanent colony after failures before.
Just a few years later, settlers experienced what is known as the Starving Time. The combined effects of the brutal winter of 1609, food shortages, devastating disease, and constant Native American attacks really screwed over colonists who resorted to pure desperation for survival.
Jamestown will end up being successful long term, but there were already failures before that. I heard of like Roanoke. So many of the settlers that came over, to the US from England were completely inept when it came to survival. They came over and were probably had very different ideas of what it would be like. You could just show up and there would be gold everywhere and stuff. That's one of the big things they thought you would just have. It could be easy. It could be some prospector, but to survive was terrible. I mean, it's a marshy place where it's hard to grow. And in fact, the indigenous peoples there are the ones that helped them start to grow. They started teaching about like these like fertilizers, and they use these like fish, I think is fertilizers, and really save their butts. But it's kind of an interesting what if Jamestown had failed like previous attempts had failed by the English, would that have deterred or changed, the history at some point for the United States? Would have got off a little bit of a different trajectory? I don't know, maybe a little. What do you think about that? What if Jamestown failed?
The colonists ate dogs,
possible alternate
rats,
history
their own shoes, and each other in order to survive. 300 settlers saw the beginning of winter, but only 60 saw the beginning of spring. The state of Rhode Island saw around 1,000 slaving voyages between the 18th and 19th century, bringing in an estimated 100,000 slaves to the Americas. The year 1919 saw the occurrence of the Elaine Massacre in Hoopsburg, Arkansas. About 100 African-American sharecroppers demanded fairer pricing for their cotton crops as they were frequently underpaid for their labors. During a meeting, which was protected by armed guards, two white men rolled up to find out what all the hullabaloo was about.
Is that the Needler
After a
from
brief struggle,
Halo?
some shots were fired, though it's unknown who shot first. One of the men died, the other injured. Well, word got out about the event being a supposed uprising being planned by the black community. In response, several locals and hundreds of U.S. troops were deployed to put an end to the so-called rebellion, resulting in the cold-blooded murder of over 200 African Americans in the area. In 1903,
so you have this, slavery is ended. Got these people of former slave ancestries that are trying to become like businessmen, be profitable, right? And you saw with maybe some of this potential success, it gets just stifled with some of these actions. These guys that are again trying to sell, cotton and get fair prices. I don't know if you've heard of the Tulsa race riots back in the 1920s. Kind of similar there. There was an African American neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they were thriving. There was like a Black Wall Street, they had called it. And it's a deeper story, but that neighborhood ends up getting destroyed and people were killed there. And it was devastating for the psychology of trying to grow the economic situation of African Americans that were only, a generation out of their slave ancestry. All right, Iowa, what do we got here? Gotta be something bad about the Iowa caucuses, right?
Residents of over 200 African Americans in the area. In 1903, residents of Van Meter, Iowa reported sightings of a strange bat-like humanoid figure for several nights. Dubbed the Van Meter Visitor, the bat-human dinosaur hybrid monster thing possessed big old flappy wings, sharp claws, and an eerily glowing horn on its melon. Many credible witnesses attest to the sightings, and locals, in true American fashion, shot at the creature in an attempt to kill it. It supposedly escaped into a nearby abandoned mine and was never seen again. In the early
used to love those kind of stories when I was a kid. New Jersey, another place I lived in when I was a kid, there was this New Jersey devil, and it was very much this like ghost stories about this wild creature out there. But what also happened to like the chupacabra? Have you heard of the Mothman prophecies? Another kind of scary thing. Those things are great. All right, Georgia.
1800s, Colonel William H. and was never seen again. In the early 1800s,
not Georgia there, but that was Iowa, but yeah, okay. Colonel William Jackson.
Colonel William H. Jackson once gifted his favorite oak tree its own deed, legally entitling it to its own ownership and all land within an 8-foot radius of itself. The original tree, located in Athens, Georgia, fell in 1942, but not before an acorn sprouted a new sapling, which legally inherited the land. Why is this bad?
Not a baby.
That's because there's a chance that this tree owns more land than you do. The Bonneville Salt Flats in northwestern Utah look like something out of...
Okay, so this is where I live. There's a lot you could be talking about. Mountain Meadows Massacre.
Owns more land than you do. The Bonneville Salt Flats in northwestern Utah look like something out of a dream sequence. Back in the 1920s, with the evolving technology of automobiles, adrenaline junkies would often challenge each other to travel across the flats as fast as possible.
Yeah, a lot of records broken.
Of course, this inevitably led to numerous crashes, breakdowns, and deaths, a tradition that persists to this day. The Silk Strike.
All right. I mean, I guess that wasn't bad about it. I mean, yeah. It's basically like, I think the longest stretch of flat land, I want to say, in the U.S. So yeah, all kinds of records were broken there. So, okay. They didn't hit like, Mountain Meadows Massacre, Utah War. All right. Anyways, New Jersey. All right. Another place I've lived.
1913 in Paterson, New Jersey, was the organized strike of over 25,000 silk workers with the goal of establishing an 8-hour workday and better working conditions. Over the course of the strike's 5-month duration, 300 silk mills had shut down with no workforce, and over 1,800 strikers were arrested for inciting violence. Ultimately, the strike was defeated as influence failed to spread beyond Paterson and no demands were ever met. Speaking of...
So again, I was talking about this earlier, where it was still an era where government intervention into economic matters like that, like labor disputes and protection of workers, were things that were slowly gained over time through democratic processes, but it was still a very dangerous time to be able to clamor for those opportunities. And there were people that died in strikes because of that. All right, Illinois.
Of terrible working conditions, the Radium Girls of Ottawa, Illinois were tasked with hand-painting watches with self-luminous paint made from radioactive powdered radium. The women would often point their brushes with their lips to produce finer tips, but their lips inadvertently sipped the radioactive drips, and if one dared to skip the lip tip grip, their managers would flip, so tips remained dipped and their lips remained zipped. Company owners expressed the safety of the material, but actively avoided it themselves. The ingestion of the radium, unsurprisingly, caused multiple women to contract radiation poisoning. Between the years of 1917 and 1927, over 50 women had died from acute radiation syndrome. 50? This sparked public outrage and reforms in labor rights.
Dude, look at the mutation going on here. Yeah, this is kind of the burgeoning era of like atomic theory and understanding, again, things like radiation. And unfortunately, these people were still right before the cusp of that, because the 20s into the 30s, that was really when that was going. So if it's starting here in 1917, the Radium Girls, they're late on it. Dude, that is nuts. Look at her chin.
Radium continued to be used in the production of watch dials up to the 1970s. Multiple residents outside of Exeter, New Hampshire all reported seeing the same strange light pattern in the sky across several evenings in 1965.
Dude, I love UFOs.
The large object reportedly moved silently across the night sky, emitting eerie red lights in a specific pattern.
UFOs.
The event terrified locals in the area for years, though skeptics have debunked this event as simply a mid-air refueling drill performed by the United States Air Force.
Nah, it's aliens.
KC-97 tankers flashed red lights in the same exact pattern that was described by eyewitnesses.
Dude, in-air refuelings are already like UFO level of craziness. It's so nuts that is something that happens and can happen. Wild. You ever tried to do that in Top Gun on NES? It was impossible.
The city of Wilmington, Delaware experienced a catastrophic outbreak of cholera and typhoid fever in the late 1800s thanks to rapid industrialization shitifying up the local water sources.
Yeah.
With hundreds sick and dozens dying, the city had to drastically overhaul the local sewer system, including installing a water purification plant in the early 1900s. But at least you can breathe a fresh sigh of relief nowadays. This is
cholera was the deadliest urban hazard of the industrial era. London had that problem too. And it essentially came from sewage coming in contact with the water that you drink and use. They didn't understand, and we're still bad at understanding how important it was to keep water clean. It's still understanding like biology. I know it seems like such common sense, but sanitary conditions, millions died over the era. All right, Nevada.
A fresh sigh of relief nowadays. This is a devil's hole pupfish, a critically endangered and supremely cute species of fish found only in the Devil's Hole in the Death Valley National Park in Nevada. Or Nevada for the locals. The fish were first discovered back in the 1940s and were almost immediately attempted to be protected. In 1967, they were officially listed as endangered thanks to local drilling by development companies, which reduced water levels within the cave system. Despite aggressive conservation efforts, there were only 38 of the little guys in existence as of spring 2025, making them one of the most critically endangered species on Earth. The Great Jacksonville Fire of 1901 completely reshaped the city of Jacksonville, Florida. After a rogue kitchen fire broke out, the flames quickly spread to a nearby mattress factory. After more than 8 hours, the inferno finally came under control after completely engulfing the majority of the city, destroying almost 2,400 buildings in the process, rendering 10,000 people homeless and 7 people dead. Now that's what I call a fire sale. Farmers in the
fires are so crazy, like in history, the history of having them in urban areas. So like think about in ancient times when you had close proximity and in places like something like Rome, for example, and they would have fires that could knock out a whole place. Because think about it too. Think about how to treat fires like in, the olden days. How do you get the water? How can you put them out? It was actually a really profitable business. Was it Pompey or whatever that like ran one of those basically like a fire station and made a lot of money from it? But think about with houses being made of wood in close proximity, how bad fires have been in history. Like today, they're not as bad, but they used to be nuts. Colorado. Okay, that's Wyoming on the map, but nice try.
Late 1960s and early 1970s were pretty pissed to find their precious moo cows slaughtered and mutilated beyond natural means. Investigations clocked in over 8,000 separate mutilations over the years. Some of the bulbous bovines were found to have sedatives in their systems, while others were secretly marked with fluorescent paint. Unidentified aircraft in the area were spotted, suggesting government interventions or possible secret weapons testing, but no conclusive evidence was ever found.
In Utah, where I live too, there was a lot of cattle that ended up dying from they call it being like being downwind of nuclear tests happening in like Arizona, New Mexico, or Nevada, Utah, and yeah, there were like animals that would die of that stuff. All right, Pennsylvania. They did get Pennsylvania right on the map. There it is.
19th century Philadelphia, Pennsylvania saw the rise of several teeth thieves who would go around robbing graves of entire bodies. The corpses would be sold to nearby medical schools for anatomical study, while the teeth were extracted and sold to companies who made dentures. Remember to smile. Kentucky is home to the McCoy family, one half of the infamous Hatfield-McCoy family feud. Initial squabbles began in the 1870s over the Civil War, with the Hatfields being Confederate sympathizers and the McCoys being pro-Union. Across 30 years, multiple lawsuits, thefts, and even murders escalated the feud, with over a dozen family members killed. The feud finally came to an end in the late 1890s. Or did it? About 100 years after the start of it all, descendants of the families came together to duke it out on the game show Family Feud in 1979, with the McCoys coming out on top. Nowadays,
so retroactively, they just you take all their land and everything. That's so funny. I want to know what the question categories were. It would have been awesome to write them in a way that would, I don't know, work for both of them, like with some Civil War history and stuff. I mean, look at these guys. Look at the dude to the right of the host. That guy looks like he just came out of like Gettysburg.
the game show Family Feud in 1979, with the McCoys coming out on top. Nowadays, the family homes are tourist attractions, holding annual festivals with activities like tug-of-war and sight tours to commemorate the decades-long dispute. Just north of South Dakota is North Dakota, and boy did it suffer a harsh winter in 1936. Record low temperatures plummeted all the way down to negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's negative 51 C for you foreigners. The frigid forecast froze farm fauna fleeing for favorable feverishness. Entire towns burned through their coal supplies, leaving families to die in their homes from exposure. In 1847, nearly 200 Dutch immigrants made their way over from the Netherlands to Wisconsin in search of a better life, but a similar cold climate.
Farming. This was that era where it was kind of before the urban industrialization that picked up in like the 1880s. Most of immigration that came up until about the mid 1800s were Europeans trying to have farmland, which was nearly impossible to acquire in Europe.
From the Netherlands to Wisconsin in search of a better life, but a similar cold climate. After months of crossing the Atlantic and scooting in through to the Great Lakes, the freaky deaky Dutch were just about to set foot in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, when...
Sheboygan. Funny word. Oh no!
A poorly maintained boiler overheated, causing a fire to erupt on board the very wooden ship.
Oh no.
Unfortunately, the ship only had 2 lifeboats, capable of holding about 20 people each.
It's like the Titanic.
Of the few hundred people aboard, only 45 managed to escape on the lifeboats. The Phoenix...
oh my god. It's like you just came across the ocean and you're like going way deep into the North American continent. And then like at the very end, after all the obstacles that you had, this is what happens. Gosh.
Ironically, went down in a blaze, never to rise from the ashes, because they were washed away.
Right.
Mysterious deaths surrounding the Ray family had caused concern for the townsfolk of Jewett City, Connecticut. These supposedly healthy family members were stricken down left and right from an undetectable killer. The boys of the family became paler by the day and were seen coughing up blood until ultimately passing away within the coming days.
What is it?
The reasonable cause of death, the townsfolk thought, was vampires. In order to stop the undead from rising and killing others, the recently deceased were exhumed from their graves and burned.
Yes.
The real culprit? Tuberculosis.
Yeah, of course, the deadliest thing out there. All you needed to do was like move to a drier climate. Again, era we have like Salem witch trials. I have some family history there. Some of the Terrys, if you follow that, the paternal line all the way back, from what I understand, was among the first Europeans to settle Connecticut. And I think I heard it might have been on my mom's side of the family. I think I have ancestors that were part of the Salem witch trials. I think I have ancestors that were killing witches.
Were exhumed from the graves and burned. The real culprit? Tuberculosis.
Vampires way cooler though than witches.
Though, the burning of the corpses probably did prevent the contagious disease from spreading any further. Go figure. In 1855, the US government approved the import of several camels to serve as pack animals through the arid landscape of the Southwest.
For real.
Formally establishing the United States Camel Corps.
Yeah.
But then the Civil War broke out a few years later in 1861, and the camels were either sold off or completely abandoned in the desert, supposedly being spotted over the next several decades. Roam free, fellas. Boston, Massachusetts is home to the...
You know what? When you think about it, dude, camels would have been amazing for the United States and the American Southwest. There's literally no animal better for traveling and for caravans, at least. Now, what you didn't have is like the trade routes that you saw that camels were so useful for, like on the Silk Road or the Saharan trade network, I guess. And horses, you know, I guess can be like quicker that way. But, you know, still, like, it seems like that could have been way better.
Deadliest nightclub fire in U.S. history. The Coconut Grove fire burned itself into people's memories in 1942 with a wealth of poor safety choices leading to the brutal blaze.
People were getting
exit doors were chained up to prevent unauthorized access, air conditioners were filled with flammable refrigerants, and everyone was packed in like sardines. Not to mention the fact that all of the lavish interior decor could catch fire faster than a witch in Salem. In all, 492 people ended up dying in the inferno. The club owner, Barney Walensky, Kowalski, who was very much aware of his club's safety code violations, was convicted on just 19 counts of manslaughter and was sentenced to just 15 years in prison, though he was pardoned after just 4. He ended up dying a few weeks after release from cancer. Now, when you're chilling in class, the last thing you want to experience is a big old gas explosion. But unfortunately, the students in the New London School in New London, Texas, were about to do just that. All right, class, who can tell me what happens when you hook a big chunk of magnesium into some water? Yep,
I'm bad at chemistry.
That's an easy one. It just, after recently canceling their natural gas supply contract to save a few buckaroos, the school board decided to instead tap into a local gasoline waste line to supplement the demand. The shitty and shoddy plumbing work caused natural gas leaks throughout the school's basement crawl spaces. Now keep in mind that natural gas is colorless and odorless, so no one was really aware of any leaks, except for the students who complained of headaches, though they were ignored by the staff.
You get out of here, go on, get.
The creeping gas cloud was inadvertently ignited on March 18th, 1937, causing an instantaneous explosion that killed 295 out of roughly 500 students and staff present in the building. The disaster led to a reform of requiring odorous additives to be added to natural gas supplies for better detection of leaks.
Yeah, we have that
if you're looking for
it's unfortunate that these kind of changes only really ever happen after a horrible, tragedy. Like fire escapes that came in after the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, right? Where all those women that were in a burning building couldn't get out and just roasted to death. Always sad that we're always a little bit late. All right, New York. Oh man. What are we going to talk about?
A breath of fresh air. New York City is probably not the best place to do so, especially in 1966.
Gross.
The great New York City smog blanketed the Big Apple in a giant fart cloud of carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and smoke. The dense haze persisted for 3 days across the 1966 Thanksgiving weekend. A public health study estimated that about 10% of the city's population suffered some adverse health effects from sucking in the smelly smog. In the end, 168 New Yorkers ended up biting the dust, prompting President Lyndon B. Johnson and several members of Congress to produce the 1967 Air Quality Act and amendments to the 1970 Clean Air Act, which heavily reduced air pollution down to more manageable levels of toxicity.
While this guy on the left is like coughing his lungs up, you see that guy at the very left? He's like, I'm against this bill.
In the wake of the U.S. Civil War, the South was really hurting for some cheap labor as all of their slaves were just freed thanks to the 13th Amendment. The best alternative? Prisoners. Convicts were extremely cheap compared to full-time employees, so
new type
in
of
the
slavery.
early 1890s, Coal Creek mine owners decided to lay off their workforce and instead conscripted convicted criminals to work the mines for pennies on the dollar. But instead of milling around, the recently sacked and salty miners decided to pick a fight, sparking the Coal Creek War of 1891. The manic miners attacked a load of state prisons and mining properties, ensuring their efforts would not be in vain. The National Guard was called in, arresting over 500 workers. The scuffle did result in Tennessee ending their convict leasing program in 1896. So that's a win.
Jeez. There have been, and still, I would think to an extent, so much exploitation of prison labor, basically as like a form of slavery. So much corruption with it too. All right, Alabama, roll tide.
Sweet Home Alabama is home to Yellow Mama, an electric chair built in 1927 by master carpenter and inmate Ed Mason. 152 criminals have gotten the sweet, stinging embrace of Yellow Mama's arms, with her final zap being performed in 2002.
Dude, I had this. I had that Madden. That was one of the, I feel like I had a big break of when I didn't play Maddens anymore. I played the crap out of that one. Maybe because that Dante Culpepper on it. And I'm a Vikings fan. Look. That was a good game. By the way, that place is definitely haunted. That's got to be haunted. Anything you have like that, all those people died there, yeah, it's haunted AF.
Since then, death row inmates were given the legal right to choose their demise, either lethal injection or the chair. And to no surprise, they opt for the less painful option. As such, Yellow Mama remains locked away in the attic of the Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, patiently waiting for her next victim.
I asked this, I forget what video it was. It figures in the last couple of weeks where I was asking about capital punishment that still happens in states. What are the ways that they do that anymore? Like, are there still electric chairs? Do they still do that? I mean, lethal injection, I think, is common one, but could you still request like firing squad or guillotine or something? Idaho.
Imagine your life as a beaver, munching away on a tree or building a dam, when all of a sudden you get yoinked away from your beaver family, put in a tiny box, flown up to the sky, and hooked out of an airplane to be parachuted down miles away from home.
Electrician
That's
video.
exactly what the Idaho Department of Fish and Game did in 1948 after locals complained of excessive property damage. 76 beavers were relocated from northwest Idaho to central Idaho via airdrop using leftover World War II parachutes. One beaver died. Very sad.
07s for that beaver. By the way, that story has so many more interesting little parts of it. I covered it. Fat Electrician did a whole video on it. It was so cool. The beavers were so badass. Yeah, they dropped them, and I guess they would they were in wood boxes, so they'd parachute down, and then they'd eat their way out. So cool. And I think, from what I understand, I think it worked. All right, Nebraska.
A big-ass swarm of locusts tore across the Midwest in 1874, devastating any and all vegetation, food, clothes, and farming equipment for days on end, with Nebraska taking most of the damage. Water sources were contaminated and livestock were consumed. High estimates place the swarm size of upwards of 12.5 trillion locusts.
God.
I mean, they were quite literally a blanket of locusts a foot high off the ground. The swarm, spanning across 2 million square miles, reportedly blocked out the sun for multiple hours during their flight. By the time the locust plague had passed, the Midwest had sustained over $200 million in crop damages.
Why did that happen? Why were there so many? I've heard about these locust storms and stuff like that. In Utah, there's a history of that with some of the pioneers that had come over. Totally, yeah, biblical, like Egypt and the Nile, the Egypt plagues.
Bennington Triangle, located across southwestern Vermont, saw several people disappear under mysterious circumstances between 1945 and 1950. The most well-known case being the disappearance of 18-year-old student Paula Jean Weldon, who up and vanished in 1946 and was never seen again. The young girl had reportedly left her college campus in the afternoon and proceeded to walk 6 miles to a nearby trail before going missing. Lack of substantial police investigation, evidence, or witnesses left the case cold.
Yeah.
The poorly run investigation had prompted the Vermont legislature to create the Vermont State Police just 7 months after Paula Jean's disappearance.
Jeez.
Hundreds.
It gotta be. It's vampires. They were in Connecticut. They went through Massachusetts and they got pushed out up there. South Dakota.
Of Lakota Sioux natives were gunned down during the Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890 after natives began expressing frustration and anger over continued forced relocation and broken promises from the U.S. government. You suck. A new religious movement called the Ghost Dance, a literal dance performed in hopes of ridding the land of white settlers, was seen as a potential act of rebellion.
That's scary. I don't like that.
As a precaution, natives were rounded up and disarmed by the U.S. Army. A misunderstanding surrounding an accidental misfire of a rifle started the massacre, which saw the murder of about 300 native men, women, and children. Montana is—
That's part of our curriculum in AP World History, where we talk about different pieces of evidence across the world about indigenous responses to imperialism and how so many of these had backfiring effects. Like this one, okay, they're doing this dance. They're hoping that the ancestors or whatever is going to somehow drive out these colonizers, and it doesn't work, and it gets even worse. There's one in Africa where they called the cattle killings. Hosha, is that the word? Cattle killings, where they think that for whatever reason, slaughtering their own cattle would somehow lead to the settlers leaving, and the obvious effects were they just slaughtered all their food and the whole livelihood, and it didn't work for them. Awful. All right, Montana. Alex, we're wrapping up.
Is home to one of the most famous archaeological hoaxes of all time, the Cardiff Giant. A quote-unquote petrified man supposedly recovered from a well in 1869 by 2 local workers. The giant hardened human stood at over 10 feet tall and weighed about 3,000 pounds. The giant acted as an attraction to which thousands of tourists flocked for 50 cents a pop, roughly $12 in today's money accounting for inflation.
Marketing.
Visitors stood in complete awe at the supposed relic of human history.
You know what, though? That looks cool, man. They are like laughing about it, but that thing looks awesome.
For inflation. Visitors stood in complete awe at the supposed relic of human history as proof of how giants once roamed the earth. But in reality, the stone statue was just that, a statue. It was created by one George Hull in an attempt to show how easily the public could be fooled by fake artifacts.
Yeah. This was an era that was actually pretty common to do these hoaxes, carnival hoaxes, the whole like slimy traveling salesmen coming to town selling their magic tonic juice. Yeah. It played on the, this was popular era for like just the occult and all this kind of weird stuff.
He constructed the statue and buried it in the aforementioned well, where a year later, he instructed his unaware workers to dig it up as a genuine artifact.
Well. Shut up. Okay.
After just 2 months of worldwide spectacle, Hull proudly confessed to the hoax as one big gotcha moment, calling everyone a bunch of stupid idiots.
How much did he make?
There you go. That's something historically bad about every US state. If you want to hear some weird stuff about every country in the world, click this. I'll see you over there.
As always, suggest videos. Best place to do it's actually the Discord server. It is linked below. All right, final thoughts. All right, that was a super fun video. I learned a ton. We've been hanging out for almost an hour now. So I want to hear from you, though, some other interesting stories about your states. What else should be in there? Just wild stories. I mean, I guess they could be bad. Maybe they're really stupid. There's got to be some more good ones out there. Let me know down below. All right, we'll see y'all next time.